gathered here because you sense that something in the world is not simply political, not merely historical, not reducible to economics or strategies, but something far deeper, something that trembles in the depths of the human soul itself. You have come to feel, perhaps without words, that what erupts in cannons and blood first begins in silence, in dreams, in the psychic underworld, where humanity is bound together. And I tell you, my friends, wars begin not in parliaments, not in the fevered speeches of leaders, not even in the clash of armies, but in the collective unconscious, where shadows stir before they find form in history. When I speak of the collective unconscious, I do not mean a vague abstraction. It is a living reality. It is the great subterranean river that runs beneath each of us, feeding the roots of our instincts, our myths, our religions, our fears, and our longings. Each of you carries it inside, though it does not belong to you alone. It belongs to humanity as a whole, to the long line of ancestors who lived and died before you. There, in that abyss, archetypes dwell. They are older than nations, older than kings, older even than gods, as we imagine them, for they are the primordial images from which gods themselves arise. The archetype of the hero, the mother, the father, the trickster, the destroyer, these are not quaint concepts, but forces, autonomous as storms. And when one of these forces is constellated in the unconscious of a people, when it is not recognized or integrated, it rises like a tidal wave and crashes upon the fragile structures of society. That, my friends, is how wars erupt, not from rational calculation, but from psychic possession. Think of it. Have you not noticed how entire nations become swept up in a fever, as though intoxicated, chanting in unison, seeing themselves mirrored in symbols, flags, songs? Have you not seen how rational individuals, who in private might hesitate, become inflamed when absorbed into the crowd? Their personal morality dissolved into a greater will. What has happened is that the collective unconscious has broken its bounds and taken possession of the conscious order, and when the shadow archetype seizes the collective psyche, what follows is devastation. The shadow, this dark twin of our consciousness, contains all that we repress, all that we deny, all that we call evil because we cannot endure to see it in ourselves. Each of you knows your personal shadow, perhaps through dreams in which you encounter a figure who terrifies you, or through moments when you act in ways you later do not recognize. But the shadow is not only personal. There is also the collective shadow, and it is this collective shadow that, when unacknowledged, spills into history as war. Consider the wars of the last century. You may believe they were driven by ideology, by race, by greed, and on the surface, yes, these were their garments. But beneath the garments lies the archetype of destruction, the myth of purification through fire, the longing for rebirth through chaos. Entire peoples projected their unacknowledged darkness onto enemies, declaring them inhuman, vermin, demons. What is this if not projection? What is this if not the failure to recognize that the evil one sees in the other is but a reflection of one's own unintegrated shadow, you must not imagine that this is only a lesson of the past. Even now, beneath your daily concerns, the collective unconscious swirls in your dreams, in the myths your children love, in the stories that dominate your cinemas and novels. Archetypes are speaking when a nation is saturated with dreams of apocalypse, with tales of heroes annihilating villains, with visions of salvation through destruction. Beware, the unconscious is preparing a stage. When political leaders speak in mythic tones, when their followers respond with near religious fervor, you are no longer in the realm of policy, but of archetypal possession. That is the soil from which wars sprout. I tell you this not to frighten you, but to awaken you. For the same unconscious that breeds war also holds the seeds of peace. It contains not only the archetype of the destroyer, but also of the wise old man, the great mother, the redeemer, the mediator. These two wait in the depths, longing for recognition, but they can only act if you bring them into consciousness. Otherwise, it is the darker forces that erupt, because what we ignore does not vanish, it gathers strength. I recall a dream told to me by a patient before the Great War. In the dream, he saw Europe covered by a black flood, and out of the waters rose a monstrous figure carrying fire in both hands. He awoke in terror. At the time, he did not understand, but I knew, as I listened, that the dream was not his alone. It was a message from the collective unconscious, a warning of what was to come. Dreams, you see, are not only personal, they are also collective. They are the whisperings of the deep river, carrying images that speak to the fate of whole peoples. When I warn that wars begin in the collective unconscious, I mean that the true battlefield lies first within. If you wish to prevent the next war, do not only arm your armies or sign your treaties, begin with yourselves. Confront the shadow in your own soul, for when you deny it, you will project it onto others, and nations composed of such individuals will project upon other nations. Then the enemy becomes not simply a rival, but the embodiment of evil, and destruction becomes justified. But when you dare to look into your own darkness, to admit that what you fear in the other is also within you, then you break the chain of projection. Then you withdraw your energy from the archetype of destruction and give it instead to reconciliation. This is why I say that self-knowledge is not a luxury, but a necessity for the survival of humanity. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not merely a personal journey, but a collective responsibility. For every individual who integrates his shadow diminishes the power of the collective shadow by 1 degree. Do not think that your small efforts are insignificant. The collective unconscious is composed of the psychic lives of all individuals. Each dream you face, each fear you confess, each prejudice you transform is a contribution to peace. Wars are prevented not by great speeches alone, but by countless silent acts of inner integration. Yet I must also tell you that the path is perilous. To face your shadow is to descend into chaos. You will feel as though you are losing yourself, for the unconscious is vast, and when you open its door, it floods in with symbols and voices. You may dream of battles, of corpses, of monstrous beings. Do not run from them. They are messengers. They show you what lies hidden. To flee from them is to give them power. To confront them is to rob them of their sting. Imagine, if you will, a man who represses his aggression. Outwardly, he is polite, gentle, civilised, but inwardly rage-festers. When he meets a neighbor with qualities he dislikes, he projects his rage onto him, calling him hostile, dangerous, threatening. Soon he convinces others to fear the neighbor as well. A community turns against one man, believing themselves righteous. This is how wars begin, first in the microcosm, then magnified in the macrocosm. Yet had the man acknowledged his own aggression, had he admitted his capacity for violence, he would not have needed to project it. He could have integrated it, transformed it, used its energy for protection, for creativity, for justice. This is why I say the greatest danger is not the atomic bomb, not the weapons of war, but the inability of humanity to face its own soul. For what use are treaties if the unconscious still seethe? What use are disarmaments if archetypes still demand sacrifice? Until we learn to integrate, we will repeat the same cycle again and again, each war wearing new masks, but animated by the same ancient forces. I want you to consider your own dreams, your own shadows. What figure appears to you in the night? Whispering of fear or anger. Do you dare to dialogue with it? Do you ask it why it comes, what it wants to teach? For the unconscious is not merely an enemy, it is also a guide. It speaks in riddles, in symbols, in images, but it speaks, and if you listen, you may prevent the eruption of destruction within your own life, and by extension, in the life of humanity. Wars begin in the collective unconscious. Yes, but so does peace. Do not imagine peace is simply the absence of war. True peace is the reconciliation of opposites, the union of shadow and light, of masculine and feminine, of destruction and creation. It is wholeness, and this wholeness begins in you, in your willingness to carry the tension of opposites without collapsing into projection. Think of the alchemists who spoke of the union of opposites, of the conjunctio, the sacred marriage. They understood, though in symbolic terms, what psychology now makes explicit, that transformation arises from holding the tension of opposites until a new synthesis is born. This is the task for each of you, to hold the inner war so that the outer war need not erupt. You may feel as though these ideas are abstract, yet they are more concrete than steel. The unconscious is not merely a realm of fantasy. It is the source from which your thoughts, your fears, your loves, and your hatreds arise. What you see on the battlefield is only the final crystallization of forces that have long moved unseen in the depths. Just as thunder and lightning are only the surface manifestation of electric tensions in the air, so war is the visible discharge of psychic tensions that have accumulated over decades, even centuries. The collective unconscious is like a great reservoir, and every neglected truth, every unacknowledged instinct, every repressed desire is a drop of poison entering the waters. Over time, The waters darken until whole nations drink of them and become intoxicated with madness. Wars begin when the unconscious contents that should have been faced individually are allowed to accumulate until they burst forth collectively. In this way, the sins of omission, the refusal to know oneself, the refusal to take responsibility for the shadow, become the crimes of history. I have seen in dreams and visions that humanity is not only bound by external chains, but also by inner archetypal dramas that demand expression. The archetype of the hero requires the shadow of the enemy. The archetype of the sacrifice demands a victim. The archetype of the apocalypse longs to destroy the old order so that something new may emerge. These patterns are not inventions of the conscious mind. They are forces that sweep across centuries, appearing in myth, in scripture, in folklore, and finally in the news of your day. Ask yourselves, why do people march into war with songs on their lips, as if intoxicated by some great mystery? Why do they willingly sacrifice their lives, not only out of fear, but with a sense of destiny? Because they feel, though they cannot name it, that they are caught up in an archetypal drama greater than themselves. They are not merely fighting for land or power, but are possessed by the god of war, Mars, Ares, or whatever name you wish to give the destroyer. When the collective unconscious awakens, it does not speak in rational terms. It speaks in symbols, in myths, in sacred words, and those who are seized by it believe they are carrying out something fated, something inevitable. I remember vividly a patient who dreamed of a black eagle spreading its wings across Europe just before the Second World War. He thought it was only his personal fear, yet when I heard it, I recognized it as an archetypal symbol, foreshadowing of what would come. Dreams such as these are warnings, messages from the collective unconscious. They tell us, beware, the archetypes are stirring. If you do not integrate them, they will integrate you. This is why I say every war is first a dream, a vision, a fantasy. And if you would prevent wars, you must learn to interpret the dreams of humanity. Look not only at treaties and armies, but at the myths children play with, at the images in films, at the obsessions in literature, for here the unconscious shows its hand long before history acts it out. When whole generations immerse themselves in fantasies of annihilation, when heroes are always saviors through violence, when redemption is imagined as the destruction of the wicked, then you may know that the unconscious is preparing the ground for war. And yet, I tell you again, the unconscious is not only destructive. The same force that births war can also birth renewal. The same archetypes that demand sacrifice can be transformed into symbols of healing. The hero can slay not only enemies, but also inner dragons. The apocalypse can mean not only destruction, but also the end of illusions, the collapse of false structures so that truth may be born. But for this to happen, you must bring the unconscious into dialogue with consciousness. Consider the alchemical symbol of the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of decay and dissolution in alchemy. This was not the end, but the beginning. The blackening was necessary for the transformation, for without it, the gold could not emerge. War, too, is a collective nigredo, a blackening of the human soul, but we need not wait for catastrophe. Each of you can undergo your own nigredo inwardly by confronting your shadow, by allowing the false to die within you, so that the true self may be born. If enough individuals undertake this inner alchemy, the collective need for outer destruction diminishes. You ask me, what can I do against the vast tides of history? I tell you, do not underestimate the power of one soul in dialogue with the unconscious. The collective unconscious is woven of countless individual threads. Each time you resist projecting your hatred onto the other, each time you integrate your fear instead of casting it outward, you withdraw energy from the collective shadow. You may not see the effect immediately, but you alter the balance in ways unseen. Just as one spark can ignite a forest, so one individual who dares to integrate the unconscious can illuminate a path for many. Do you not see wars are the failure of consciousness? They are the refusal of a people to hold the tension of opposites within themselves. When the opposites cannot be reconciled inwardly, they are enacted outwardly in blood. This is why individuation, the becoming of the whole person, is not merely a personal luxury, but the most radical political act. A people of individuated individuals will not need war, for they will have fought it inwardly. But a people who flee from the shadow will always create enemies to bear it for them. Look around you today. Do you not see how quickly people divide the world into good and evil, into us and them? Do you not see how eager they are to demonize, how easily they fall into mythic language? This is the mark of unconscious projection. Beware whenever you hear people speak of the enemy as inhuman, as absolute evil. Beware whenever the language of myth replaces the language of reality, for then you know the archetypes are at work and war is near. But there is hope, for just as archetypes can possess us, we can also work with them consciously. We can honor them through ritual, through art, through dream work. We can give them expression without destruction. Myths were not meant to remain unconscious. They were meant to be lived symbolically, to guide the soul toward wholeness. When myths are forgotten or denied, they force themselves upon us in literal, catastrophic forms. To prevent war, we must remember our myths. We must live them consciously. This, I believe, is the task of culture, to provide a symbolic life so that archetypal energies are expressed in beauty and meaning rather than in destruction. Religion, art, literature, these are not luxuries but necessities. Without them, the unconscious breaks into the world in its raw, destructive form. A society that loses its symbolic life will inevitably turn its myths into bombs. But a society that honors its myths consciously can channel the archetypes into creation. So I say to you, create rituals, create symbols, create art that speaks to the depths. Do not abandon your myths to the unconscious. Live them in full awareness. Then the hero need not become a soldier. The sacrifice need not become a corpse. The apocalypse need not become a world war. They can become inner journeys, transformations of the soul. But you must not imagine that the task is easy. To live symbolically is to take upon yourself a burden that most would rather cast aside, For to see the archetypes consciously is to realize that you are not the master of your soul, but its servant, its interpreter, its witness. You must listen to voices that come in dreams. You must attend to fantasies that unsettle you. You must dare to read the myths, not as entertainment, but as revelations of your own psychic truth. Few dare this. Many would rather project these forces outward, onto nations, onto enemies, onto scapegoats, than face them within. That is why wars continue, because men prefer to fight in the outer world rather than endure the inner battle. It is easier, is it not, to condemn your neighbor than to acknowledge your own envy. Easier to accuse a people of barbarism than to admit your own suppressed violence. Easier to believe that evil resides outside than to confess it stirs within your own heart. This is the tragic pattern of history, the refusal of self-knowledge, and each refusal gives more strength to the collective shadow until it breaks loose like a storm. I tell you, the shadow is not to be destroyed, but to be integrated. If you deny your aggression, it will possess you. But if you integrate it, it becomes courage. If you deny your fear, it will paralyze you. But if you integrate it, it becomes wisdom. If you deny your desire for power, it will corrupt you. But if you integrate it, it becomes leadership. Every archetype has two faces: destructive when unconscious, creative when conscious. War arises when nations live only the destructive faces of their archetypes. Peace arises when they bring forth the creative. Let me give you an image. Imagine a great fire hidden in the earth. If it bursts forth unconsciously, it destroys fields, homes, lives. But if you bring it to the surface consciously, if you contain it, it warms, it cooks, it gives life. The unconscious is such a fire. Contained, it is culture. Uncontained, it is war. In my practice, I saw again and again that individuals who refused their unconscious would be overwhelmed by it. They would develop symptoms, neurose, even psychoses. But those who dared to confront their dreams, who dared to enter their fantasies, found healing. The same law applies to humanity. A society that refuses its unconscious will become sick, erupting in war and destruction. But a society that enters into dialogue with its myths and symbols can find transformation. It is for this reason that I have always insisted that psychology is not only for patients in consulting rooms. Psychology is for humanity. The collective unconscious is the greatest reality of our time. And unless we recognize it, it will devour us. Do you not see how modern technology has given us weapons of such power that a single war could end civilization? Do you not see how dangerous it is to leave the unconscious unrecognized in such an age? The more power man gains outwardly, the more imperative it becomes that he knows himself inwardly. Otherwise, his unconscious will use his technology for its own archetypal dramas, and the result will be catastrophe. I ask you, therefore, to become aware not only for yourself but for the world. Each of you is a vessel of the collective unconscious. Each of you is responsible for what arises in you. When you deny your darkness, you feed the darkness of the world. When you face it, you diminish that darkness. Do not underestimate your role. Wars begin in the collective unconscious, but the collective unconscious is composed of you. Now, I must speak of dreams again, for they are the language of the unconscious. Dreams do not lie. They reveal what consciousness refuses to see. If you would know where war is brewing, listen to your dreams. If you would know what part you play in the collective drama, interpret your symbols. For the unconscious always sends signs before it erupts. Just as storms are preceded by dark clouds, so wars are preceded by dreams of destruction, by fantasies of division, by obsessions with enemies. Do you dream of being pursued, of fighting, of being annihilated? Ask yourself, is this merely personal fear? Or is it also a reflection of the collective shadow? Many of you dream not only for yourselves, but for humanity. Your dream may reveal what 1,000 others feel, but do not perceive. Do not dismiss such dreams. They are warnings. And when you find in your dreams a figure who threatens you, do not flee. Speak to it. Ask why it comes. You may discover that what you feared was a messenger bearing a truth you needed. This is the work of integration, to converse with the unconscious, to make its figures conscious, so that they no longer need to act themselves out in the outer world. But people resist this work because it feels unbearable. To hold the tension of opposites within yourself is agony. You want to choose one side, to declare yourself wholly good and the other wholly evil. But if you do this, you fall into projection, and the archetypes seize you. True maturity is the capacity to endure the tension of opposites without fleeing into projection. It is to recognize that you too contain both light and darkness, and to hold them until a higher reconciliation emerges. I tell you, this is the only path to peace. Peace is not the triumph of one side over another, but the reconciliation of opposites in a higher unity. In alchemical language, it is the marriage of Sol and Luna, of king and queen, of light and dark. It is the birth of the philosopher's stone, the new consciousness that transcends war. Without this reconciliation, there can only be temporary truces, for the unconscious will continue its work until it is acknowledged. Therefore, if you wish to prevent war, to begin not with others but with yourself, look within, ask, whom do I hate, whom do I fear, whom do I condemn, and then ask, what part of myself am I projecting onto them? This is the path of individuation. It is the most difficult path, but it is the only one that can save the world. Do not imagine that governments alone can prevent wars. They can sign treaties, but treaties are only paper unless the unconscious is addressed. Do not imagine that armies can keep you safe. They can fight enemies, but they cannot fight archetypes. Only consciousness can do that. Only self-knowledge can do that. So when you go home, do not only discuss politics, discuss your dreams. Do not only follow the news, follow the symbols that arise in your fantasies. Do not only prepare for outer conflicts, prepare for inner ones, for it is there that the true battle lies. And know this, the unconscious is not only a danger, but a treasure, for just as it births wars, it also births wisdom. The archetype of the wise old man the self, the center that holds all opposites, these two dwell within you. And when you dare to descend into your own depths, you may discover that beneath the chaos lies order, beneath the terror lies meaning. This is the ultimate truth, that even the archetypes of destruction are part of a greater wholeness, and that through them the self seeks to be born. You see now that the unconscious is not an abstract theory, but the ground upon which human destiny unfolds. The wars of the world are not accidents, but eruptions of neglected inner truths. And if humanity does not learn to live symbolically, to integrate the archetypal energies consciously, it will continue to suffer catastrophes in which millions pay the price for the unconsciousness of the few. I tell you with urgency, the greatest danger is not the shadow itself, but our refusal to see it. For when you turn your face away from the darkness, it does not vanish. It gathers behind you, swelling until it bursts forth like a storm you cannot control. The collective unconscious waits patiently for centuries, if need be, until the moment of weakness comes, and then it strikes. But there is another truth, that the unconscious also holds the self, the archetype of wholeness, the God image in the soul. This self longs to reconcile opposites, to bring shadow into light, to heal division. The self works through dreams, through symbols, through synchronicities, and if you listen, it will guide you toward peace. But you must listen. When you walk in the forest and feel the ancient presence of the trees, when you gaze into the eyes of a child and sense eternity, when you dream of light breaking through darkness, you are experiencing the voice of the self. It whispers that wholeness is possible, that humanity need not destroy itself, that wars can end when the inner war ends. But this requires courage beyond the ordinary, the courage to admit that the enemy is within as well as without. I ask you, can you see the tyrant within yourself, the one who demands control, who fears freedom, who suppresses life? Can you see the coward within, who would rather obey than risk? Can you see the destroyer within, who longs to burn it all down? If you can see them, then you can also see the healer within, the mediator, the lover, the sage. For the unconscious is whole, containing all. To see only half is to fall into war. To see both is to begin peace. Do not be dismayed if you feel overwhelmed. The unconscious is vast, and no one can contain it fully. But even a little integration matters. To admit one's shadow is to break the spell of projection. To listen to one dream is to alter the course of fate. To bring one symbol into consciousness is to shift the balance of the collective. Never underestimate the power of one moment of awareness. And I must tell you this as well. The path of individuation is also the path of suffering. For to face the unconscious is to descend into hell. It is to meet demons, to wander in darkness, to lose the certainties of the ego. But this descent is also the prelude to transformation. The hero must enter the underworld before he returns with treasure. The seed must fall into the earth and die before it becomes a tree. The soul must endure its own apocalypse before it is reborn. This is the law of the unconscious death and rebirth, destruction and creation. always intertwined. Therefore, when you see wars, know that they are also attempts at rebirth. Humanity, unconscious of its own longing for renewal, choose destruction instead. But you can choose differently. You can undergo the death and rebirth inwardly, so that the world need not suffer it outwardly. This is why inner work is the greatest gift you can give to humanity. I will leave you with this vision. Imagine a great circle. In it stand the archetypes, the warrior, the lover, the sage, the mother, the trickster, the destroyer. They are quarreling, fighting for dominance. This is the state of the unconscious when it is not integrated. But then, in the center of the circle, appears the self, a radiant figure who gathers them all, who holds them without rejecting any, who reconciles their opposites. Slowly, the quarrel subsides. The archetypes bow to the self, recognizing their place in the whole. This is what can happen in you. And in humanity, if we dare the path of individuation, wars begin in the collective unconscious. Yes, but so does redemption, so does wisdom, so does love. The choice is always before us, to deny and project, or to integrate and transform. If we choose denial, war will return again and again. If we choose integration, a new age may dawn, one in which the archetypes serve consciousness instead of devouring it. So I call you to courage. Do not flee from your shadow. Do not despise your dreams. Do not abandon your myths. Enter them. Listen to them. Integrate them. For in doing so, you are not only saving yourself, you are saving humanity from its own unconscious. Remember always, the enemy you hate is also your teacher. The fear that haunts you is also your guide. The darkness you dread contains the light you seek. If you can hold this paradox, if you can endure the tension without collapsing into violence, then you become a vessel of peace. And every vessel of peace lessens the likelihood of war. I speak these words not as abstract philosophy, but as truth won through pain, through decades of listening to dreams, to patience, to the unconscious itself. I have seen what happens when men refuse the shadow, and I have seen what happens when they embrace it. The former leads to catastrophe, the latter to wholeness. The choice is yours, and through you, the choice is humanity's. So let us not deceive ourselves. The next war is already brewing in the unconscious. The question is whether we will face it inwardly or act it out outwardly. If we choose the inner path, perhaps the outer war will not come. If we choose projection, then destruction is inevitable. The time is short, the stakes are high, but the possibility of transformation remains. Therefore, I urge you, know yourself, integrity your shadow, listen to your dreams, live your myths, become whole. For only whole individuals can create a whole world, and only a whole world can be at peace. This is the truth. Wars begin in the collective unconscious, but so does the possibility of peace. The unconscious is both the danger and the salvation. If we deny it, we are doomed. If we embrace it, we may yet be redeemed. The choice lies before you now. in this very moment